Being a student of literature or not, we are sure you have heard of the title The Great Gatsby. If yes, then we will be telling you about the great mind who wrote it. And if you haven't, then let us introduce you to Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald, also known as F. Scott Fitzgerald. Born in 1896 and died in 1940, Fitzgerald was an American novelist, essayist, and short story writer. His work depicts excessiveness and flamboyance of jazz age, a time where jazz music and dancing was at its peak. Moreover, he belonged to the lost generation, which meant that he was one of the people born between 1883 to 1900. Works of this generation were cynical, portrayed after effects of World War I and disillusionment. His personal life is widely mirrored in his work, for example, his relation with his wife Zelda, or his own self belonging to an aristocratic family. If the audience is wondering why we chose this author out of many renowned American ones, it is because no other writer of the United States at that time could show the world what the American dream results in actuality, and the power it holds over the American psyche.
America entered the 20th century optimistically as a wealthy, strong world power. Although this time period started off with prosperity, it soon became one characterized by two world wars and a severe economic depression. These events ushered in a new age in American literature called modernism, as writers began to attempt to express modern life with their writings. The era was characterized by a breakaway from traditional styles of poetry and other types of writing. It was during this time that authors began to experiment with different styles of writing and earned American international acclaim. Although their works were very different, modern authors shared a common purpose, which was to capture the essence of modern life. Most modern works reflected the thoughts and confusion of most Americans, especially during the Great Depression and the two world wars. There was also a loss of faith and hope in the American people during this time period and a collapse of morality and values. Two major themes of the era were confusion and disillusionment. These themes and the literary movement as a whole reflected the new mindset of the American people after the turn of the century. It was because of this mindset and the loss of hope in the American dream that the major authors of the time period became known as the Lost Generation.
Since the information is proceeding towards the literature of modernism, I would be telling about how the movement of modern age is evident in the writing style of Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald's writing style was inspired by two American writers such as Joseph Conrad and Sherwood Anderson. As you know that many of his work can be studied for their metaphorical elements because he includes much of his personal experience into the text. In order to engage with the reader and develop his own distinctive style, he employs several kinds of writing strategies such as diction, similes, and rhetorical technique to convey his message to the reader. He also uses imagery to create a graphic representation of the situation, helping the reader's imagination in visualizing the story. He also uses metaphor in order to make his argument strong. Fitzgerald also has used a fascinating technique for setting the tone of his writing. As you know that his most famous work, The Great Gatsby, is written in a poetic manner. The plot of the story is narrated from the viewpoint of Nick Carraway, who is spending a summer on a Long Island and working in New York City, began to romanticize his next-door neighbor, the tragic lover J. Gatsby. Fitzgerald's poetic prose makes us feel pity for Gatsby, whom we would normally reject as simply some low-life thief.
So far, we have done nothing but glorify this author. Thus, it is only fair to provide the audience with how the critics of his time discern most of his works. Fitzgerald has produced quite a few classic literary novels. However, the acknowledgements were mostly post-mortem. During his lifetime, Fitzgerald only received limited success and often faced criticism over his works and lifestyle. When Fitzgerald first published his novel, This Side of Paradise, the book received mostly positive feedback, with critics falling over how well written the storyline was and how well he portrayed the American adolescents. Due to the success of Fitzgerald's first book, critics had high expectations for his upcoming works. Eventually, when Fitzgerald published his most well-known work to date, The Great Gatsby, critics during his time gave mixed reviews. While some considered the novel to be a work of art, Others thought it to be painfully forced. Ruth Hale of the Daily Brooklyn Eagle quotes, "Find me one chemical trace of magic, life, irony, romance, or mysticism in all of The Great Gatsby, and I will bind myself to read one Scott Fitzgerald book a week for the rest of my life." Unquote. Leading Fitzgerald scholar James L. W. West III agrees and calls The Great Gatsby a national scripture. He says that it embodies the American spirit, the American will to reinvent oneself. After that, when Fitzgerald himself expected his novel Tender is the Night to be considered a masterpiece, the novel was actually met with generally negative reviews from critics who thought that Fitzgerald did not live up to their expectations. While if we talk about the Fitzgerald's unfinished novel, The Love of the Last Tycoon, the novel gained widespread attention and many critics believed that if Fitzgerald had gotten to finish the novel, it would have been his best work. To sum up, Scott Fitzgerald is widely acclaimed as one of the greatest American writers of the 20th century. In conclusion, this author was well praised for his depiction of grandiosity and extravagance of the Jazz Age in his works.